G'day everybody, my name is Jacques. I am a software engineer, or at least I pretend to be, based in San Francisco. As you probably guessed from my accent, I might not be from around here. I'm Australian by origin, or extraction, or whatever you want to call it. So today we're going to talk about Knative. I obviously am somewhat of a fan. I sat down and spent about a year writing a book about it. And I hope that you will be too. What I'm looking forward to talking about today is essentially CloudEvents. That's going to be a large part of what I talk about today. I'm going to be taking advantage of a few things here and there in Knative land, but really my intent is to talk about or focus on moving CloudEvents around. A few provisos. One is I am supremely underprepared for this episode or this show, this experience. One of the things that gives me some comfort is that, at least on paper, I have 2 hours to work my magic, or not work my magic, as the case may or may not be. But also that, I kind of enjoy splashing around, and there will be things that I've forgotten since I wrote them several months ago that I'll have to rediscover. There'll be things I'm discovering for the first time. I'm going to be doing my best to explain my thinking as I go, explain what the principles are, and also hopefully having a chance to chat to all of you. I'm going to set a timer on my phone to go off approximately every half an hour. I will be looking at the chat, which is down here. So when I'm ignoring you, hi Scott. When I'm ignoring you, it's nothing personal. It's mostly that I get sucked into the subject pretty closely. One thing I like to say to people is that going back one step, one practice that I enjoyed a lot in my time at I learnt that OBS can freeze my computer entirely, which is an impressive feature that I have not seen for a long time. So I'm not sure where we were before my connection dropped out. But basically what I was saying is that today I'm going to focus on a variety of things. And by focus, I mean I'm going to splosh about trying to remember how to do things. If you watched, if you read the book, or even just skimmed the first chapter, this is what I want to do. Now, in the first chapter, I gave the example of a hit counter. If you don't know what a hit counter is, that is okay. I feel old if I admit that these were a huge thing when I was a teenager. And the gist is you have a number on a page, usually an image, and that image shows how many people have visited the website. And it used to be a big deal in the early days because you sort of wanted to brag that you'd gotten a couple of thousand visitors. And that made you the big kahuna amongst your friends. The way this used to be done, essentially, if I can pull up another diagram in my super scientific technique. Yes, all these things look very similar. Is that the one? No, that's too complicated. Yes. I bet you're glad you came here to listen to this. No, that's the CloudEvents logo. You know what? Who cares? The point is that it used to be in the olden days that you had your web process. Very often that was written in Perl, which is a language that gets more hate than it really ought to, in my opinion. Used to be written in Perl. You would visit the web page, a Perl script would run, and as part of that script, it would often create an image, right? And that image would have numbers in it. So you would just have little numbers like this, right? Obviously not as gigantic as this. It would usually be a teeny tiny little thing right down at the bottom of the page, like so. Thanks for visiting my website, that sort of thing. And by doing it all through the one process, through that one Perl script, you had a lot of problems. One is that, serving the page could be held up by rendering the image. Or it might be that the image didn't render at all. So that's kind of a hassle. What I talk about in the first chapter is sort of breaking this up a little bit into a couple of different parts, trying to make it more asynchronous. And this is an example that I walk through largely as a hypothetical. It's mostly me talking about what you could do or how these things might be assembled without actually doing anything. So I see a comment that the noise is a bit quiet. I will turn up the gain. I apologize for that, and I will try to eat the microphone. Let's see. Yeah, I'm looking at my meter. That looks a little bit better. And if you have, yep, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. It's very helpful. Yeah, so, I want to sort of work through this experience a bit more. I want to work through this example. Now, I should, again, warn you that I have not prepared to do this. So there's every possibility that I'll get some of the way through this and it'll turn out that I missed something, got something wrong, I had to backstep. I guess what I'm saying is it's not going to be like a cooking show where I get to say, here's one I prepared earlier. I'm just going to be winging it as I go. There's my mouse pointer. So I'm going to move this off screen now. If you have the book in front of you, you can go to chapter 1. And I believe, as I go through my copies of the chapters here, that the one I have here is figure 1.7 in that chapter. That was what we were looking at just a moment ago. Well, I can probably stop this clock now. By the way, this is a really cool little program called TTY Clock, which is very useful. I'm sure that the people who wrote it thought to themselves, boy, I hope that people use it to introduce their streams. And I'm also going to start my timer to make sure I don't forget to talk to people. So where are we going to start? I'm going to start by installing a program called CloudEvent Player. You may have seen this from the second half of the book. It's a sort of like a little debugging tool. So when I say install, I mean I'm going to use, KN services to do it. So let's see, create. Well, you know what, I'm just going to peek at it. Going along the idea of a service is essentially it is a program that you want to run. It needs to have a route attached to it. It needs to be plugged into an autoscaler. You want some sense of history for it. The KN CLI is the, so to speak, official CLI for Knative. You don't have to use it, is a thing. So, for example, if you're a Kubernetes expert, you probably won't use it very much, possibly not at all. That's because you would be more accustomed to doing kubectl apply or kubectl apply, or whichever one is your local dialect that has been settled in Blood Wars. I like kubectl. So you might be using kubectl apply to send some YAML. In the book, I tried to focus on using the KN CLI. It is more friendly for sort of interactive work of the sort that we're going to be doing today. And so let's see. First of all, I'm going to see if there are any already running. And I don't think there should be, because I set this up this morning as a clean cluster. And let me see. I want to get the CloudEvent player. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, there we go. This was the one. Oh, hello, that's an issue. I wonder why. And in here somewhere is some helpful stuff. Actually, you know what I might also do? There's another one as well that's pretty useful, which Scott, who's in the chat, is responsible for, which is called Sockeye. It definitely has a tastier name. No offense to CloudEvents player. Let me think. Scott, new Scott, and 3W Scott. I want to bring it up. Hey, there we go. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, I should have made sure I had code going. So yeah, you can see an example here that Scott is recommending people use kubectl. And let's sort of like take a peek at that YAML, by the way. I'm expecting that it's going to be Knative YAML. Yeah. So this is sort of like the YAML you'd expect to see in Knative land if you're still using kubectl and not KN per se. And it has all the sort of the standard shape and accoutrement of a Kubernetes record document, whatever you want to call it. These are typically called CRDs. That term is used pretty loosely to encompass a whole range of closely related concepts, but the CRD actually refers to the definition of the document. So this is a CR, and you can take that to the pub and win your trivia night. So the important thing about this thing is going to be that it is a kind service. So a moment ago, you'll see I said KN service list, and I was interested in what Knative services were running, if any. And in particular down here, you're going to be seeing that I have a reference to an image. I see Scott says that he has... Yes, Scott, I agree. I'm going to use yours. I decided on the spot. CloudEvents Player is really good as well. They have sort of like different strengths and weaknesses. I found while writing the book that it was easier to inspect, I guess you could say, records or to sort of like within cluster create events and send them with CloudEvents Player. It has a useful capability for that. Whereas I found the reverse when I was creating events from the command line myself and sending them into my cluster. I found that Sockeye was an easier target to work with. It's been a few months since I made that decision to sort of use both in different parts of the book to cover the possibilities. And so the details have faded somewhat. But getting Sockeye installed, I think, is going to be easier today. So I'm going to do that to get myself started. And Scott's asking me, have I tried Graph? Well, if I knew what it was, maybe. Let me go have a look. Ding, 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 ding. This guy, visualize your Kubernetes connections. Are you doing amazing things again? Scott, you're disgusting. It's really frustrating that you keep doing amazing things. Every once in a while, I'm like, maybe I'm smart, and then I have a Scott moment. And actually, I should take a moment to make a big shout out to everybody in the Knative community. Scott, who is my silent interlocutor today, is one of the founding engineers who works at VMware, came from Google, originally where he worked on it. Matt Moore, of course, Vile, Jason Hall, Joe Burnett, and of course lots of that's sort of the Googlers, and lots of other folks come from all sorts of companies. I came from Pivotal originally, now at VMware. There were folks from Red Hat like Paul Murray and Thomas Marcus, and from IBM folks like Carlos Santana and Dr. Max and Dr. Jules, and it's actually quite a large. Doug Davis, I'm sorry, Doug, I didn't mean to forget you. It's quite a large and active community of really, really smart people. And it is exceedingly difficult for me not to have a truly impressive imposter syndrome when working around these folks. Like, I wrote the book and I still feel dumb. I'm just going to say that. So let's have a look at Graph as well. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna hold off on Graph for a second. I want to try to get to a point where I'm sending an event from my terminal to Sockeye. My theory is that this sort of like will pave the way of the things I need to do to sort of like poke things with a stick. Because if you remember the way the diagram's sort of laid out, I have a couple of different services involved. I'm probably going to cheat and not do an image renderer today. That almost always includes installing image magic or graphic magic, and then a whole bunch of sort of tap dancing and turning your head sideways and, incanting particular spells to make it work properly. So what I might do, in fact, is cheat and just have a little service that you can hit and it sends back a number and you render that into the page as text, and nobody has to know that we did that. But in the meantime, I still need something that will serve some sort of HTML, right? It will need to emit an event which goes through the broker. There will need to be a hit counter, and the hit counter in this original thing I had, it just spit out a thing. So I'll have a sort of like this might actually go away. Since I'm not rendering an image, I might just have new hit and the hit counter, and then at some point, whatever's served from here also has some sort of JavaScript connection into there. I hope that tiny little crosshairs is visible. If it's not, just pretend that it is. So let's keep going. Oh, yes, the point is that I want to be able to send events to arbitrary locations. So, for example, it will be very helpful in a little while if I'm able to send one of these new hit commands without having to visit a homepage server. It means that I could build the hit counter service first, in fact, and sort of work on the broker issues or the broker design, what triggers I'm going to have and what filters and how should the fields be arranged and that sort of thing. So I'm going to do that first. It's always nice to have a little debugging apparatus set up. Now we established, no, that's not what I wanted. Oh, right, because when you make it huge, it assumes you're on like a giant mobile phone or something. Everything's fun. I notice here that Scott is using Co to run his software. I might wind up using Co myself later on in this discussion, so I will pretend that it doesn't exist just yet. Okay, good old copy pasta. I'm not doing anything too dangerous here, I'm sure. Yeah, I squinted it earlier, so that's my excuse. Yo, there we go. All right. Now I should be able to do a service list, and I should be able to see it. Well, almost. I mean, it's getting started. Let's make this full screen so that the wrapping is not terrible. Chiggity chug. Okay, there we go. So there's a couple of things that are worth noting about Knative Service List. One is it's pretty wide, but also it very helpfully sort of digs out the URL for you. And this is going to beg the question of whether I correctly set up this. No, I didn't. That was clever. So as part of preparation for today, let's see. I'm going to move this to another screen in case there's anything particularly fascinating in my open recent files that you shouldn't know about. So sorry about that. Book directory, manuscript. No, that's not what I wanted. I put it in code. So I have a sort of a helper script that I have used in writing the book to install Knative for me, right? I actually, if I remember correctly, have a copy of this, which I sort of walk through in chapter 9. Yeah, Scott, I don't have any Bitcoin. I like money is the face of it. But, you know, I'm sure if I wanted to be fully conversant with the cutting edge of the internet, if somebody could come up with a sort of an AI Bitcoin that was somehow connected to Elon Musk, I'm sure that I could get on board with that. Yeah, so this is the script I've been using to install things. It has a really nice sort of thing. I'm using cap, which if you haven't seen that before, is like one of my favorite things ever. I believe it's getcap.io. Yeah, there it is. So this is part of a sort of a family of tools called Carvel or Carvel. You know what? Nobody's ever pronounced it to me in a way that made me think they're an authority on the subject. I don't know. It's a reference to sort of a boat construction technique. And that's about all I know. It's a cool name. So there's cap. Those of you who have seen tools like Bosch, and to some degree have seen things like Terraform, would find cap somewhat familiar. By itself, using kubectl apply works-ish, but cap has a whole bunch of extra clever bits to make sure that things sort of get applied in a particular order. For example, since there are a bunch of custom resource definitions, CRDs, that get installed as part of Knative, what will happen is that cap will put those in first because later records will then depend on it. By itself, Kubernetes doesn't do this kind of ordering. Everything happens asynchronously, and so whether your installation succeeds the first time is a matter of luck, timing, right? Which is not my favorite thing. So cap comes from a couple of folks who had previously worked on a tool called Bosch, which is a whole other universe, which I won't go into today because that's not what we're here for. So I'm using cap in this. My problem has been, of course, that in spinning up an entirely new cluster today, I forgot that this means that all of the magical IPs that are hard-coded or semi-hard-coded have changed. They're no longer useful. So over here, oh, that's right. I made this cleverer. I remember now. Now, dun, 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 dun. Code, values. Let's see if I can remember how my code works. See, that should have worked. I'm going to just run cap again and see how we go. Or run this code again. So, going to do a splitsy, and I'm going to cd up to the book, which is where the code lives. I'm going to run code, install serving. Okay, so I've got a target cluster there. Yep, it's going to say everything's great. It's going to do some updates, apparently, which is mysterious to me, to be honest. I'm not sure why it's doing that. This is sort of some of the output you get from cap. It tells you all sorts of nice things. You see these errors about observability. That's because it's kind of not a thing anymore. And I really should have taken that out of my script. So where am I doing that? Let's see. Serving releases download. CIDs, core, courier, eventing. Oh, tracing config map. Yes, this one. This is where I had additional configuration for it. And because I had edited this configuration or changed this configuration, Kubernetes, a bunch of stuff is supposed to sort of light up, but the things are not there anymore. Stop me if I get too vague. So really, this should not be here for this moment. And let's go back and use Cap again, because Cap is pretty smart. He says as he sees an error code there, Cap is pretty smart at applying things the way you want to, right? It in a sense, it's not idempotent because that degree of idempotency depends on the actual resources in Kubernetes, but it's close enough. It's smart about what it does. So let's see. Oh, it's mad. Oh, yep, that was also clever. I wanted full screen. Yes, because I already had this. So let's do that. There we go. And you can see that one thing that Cap does that's really nice is that it will, having worked out a sort of an order that makes sense and understanding dependencies between different kinds of records and resources inside of Kubernetes, it will wait for things to happen. Okay, let's see what it says. Dun, 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 V1, revisions. Okay, that all makes sense that I'm ignoring the betas and the alphas. Oh, unexpected, syntax error. Well, that's no good, is it? See, I got rid of something, and I'm going to bet that I made a fat finger somewhere. Okay, values, IP address, JSON path. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, says succeeded, but my terminal has the big red shiny thing, which tells me that it got a non-zero code. Updating resource, failed calling. Okay, yeah, so that makes sense because Knative has a webhook. In the book, I sort of point out that this name is unfortunate because it really refers to the implementation of a piece of software. Kubernetes, if you are not aware, has the ability to register software with the API server. And you can say, I am interested in records of this kind, and I would like to be able to intercept them, right? And edit them, perhaps. That's a mutating one, or perhaps to make decisions about whether someone or an operation should be allowed or not, which is an admissions controller, sort of. So the webhook in Knative does all of these things. It is sort of like a central clearinghouse for many kinds of validation and defaulting and so on and so forth. In the previous versions of Knative, there was a sort of an observability element. But the real difficulty came out that it was sort of hard to maintain, is one problem. Another problem is that everybody has different opinions about what should go in it and how should it be configured. And ultimately, anything that is observability in Knative is really just observability of not concourse, I beg your pardon. You can tell what kind of person I am. Is really just about the observability of Kubernetes itself, right? All the Kubernetes tools that do observability are basically good for purpose in the land of Knative. So there used to be this observability repo. It used to be supported. The webhook would have known about the various types, and now it doesn't. So in the interests of, let me see, clear, no. I can do cap list, or I can do lizard. That doesn't seem to work as well. Okay, so I've got Knative v0.17.1. And what I'm going to do is get rid of that. Like so. Right, I'm just going to nuke it and start it up again. Yeah, so I see a comment from Scott saying that serving has dropped the monitoring package, which is something I knew was happening. But in my head, I had not connected the dots that this would also affect the sort of the behavior of the webhook, or that the webhook would not recognize it and therefore sort of complain about it. This is not a fatal error, I believe, in any sense. It's just that I don't have any production workloads and I get finicky about silly things, so I'm just going to nuke the sucker and do it again. This is the, of course, famous Ripley technique. Take it off and nuke the entire site from orbit. So you can see that Cap does a pretty decent job of deleting things as well in a sensible order. If this gets stuck, it's going to be my friend finalizes, which is a piece of trivia which annoys the heck out of me. And I really hope we don't get to that. So Here we go, up to 183 out of 188 done. While that's going on, I'm going to do some scrolling up. And the reason I'm going to scroll up is because I want to look at some of the stuff I've sailed past jauntily. Yes, there are many things going on. Is this sort of table readout, which is really one of my favorite things about CAP, is that it will give you essentially a description of what it intends to do. There we go. It'll look at, you can sort of say what namespaces things are in. Cluster means that it's a cluster namespace. That's not really helpful. But also sort of like it understands conditions, how things are related to each other, how old it is, what operation it plans to do, and so on and so forth. There's an enormous amount of information that CAP can give you in that respect. Oh, see that? Oh, that's not true. I was going to say that's a bad sign, but namespaces often take a little while longer to clear up. And it looks like it got rid of the webhook, the activator, courier, the broker. Yeah, it got rid of most of the sort of the apparatus of Knative. There's a fair few moving parts. While this is, doing its deletion, I'm going to take a moment to rant. There's a sort of a thing on Twitter that doesn't really narrow it down. Early in the days of Knative, it was like, well, look at all these moving parts. Why does it have it? Why does it install so many things? This isn't serverless. I reject that notion. And I reject it because as a developer, you don't so really care about the moving parts. Or you shouldn't, right? That's really something that should be provided to you. Serverless is either a developer experience, in which case, why do you care? And it can also be sort of like an economic distribution. Someone else is hosting and operating and bearing the costs of running the apparatus, the machinery that would make Knative work. But like the thing about that is that the reason there are several moving parts to Knative, the reason it needs a certain amount of capacity is because it does a lot. It does a lot, and it has to deal with a great many fascinating corner cases that arise. Oh, hello, we're down to 1. So that's promising. I had a terrifying feeling sinking in my gut that it would somehow hang and I'd have to be doing some live surgery on the Kubernetes records. So yeah, Knative does an awful lot. So in the book, I talk about a lot of things, but it's at an introductory level. There are hundreds and hundreds of careful, minute details that have to be considered in these things. And there's sort of the weekend, I could build it in a weekend effect. It's like, yeah, you kind of could, but you could only get as far as a 30-second ASCII art demo. You couldn't necessarily do all the things or have dealt with all the corner cases. And that requires resources. That requires some containers to exist. Come on, man. I'm filibustering here like crazy. Hurry up and delete that last namespace. While that's going on, let's see if we can find something to distract ourselves. Oh, wait. Hey! See, all you have to do to get a computer to do what you want is to threaten it. Now, let's refresh our memories. Where were we at? We were trying to set stuff up. Yes. So the IP was wrong. Check. And then that meant I couldn't get access to my service. And in fact, that service is probably, should be gone now. As part of the overall from orbit nuking operation, it has now ceased to be, which is, I'm sure, very sad for Scott because, that was an instance of sockeye. So first things first, I'm going to reinstall serving using my magical script, which hopefully this time will not do anything too silly. It's a relatively quick operation, though Knative has a reasonable number of containers and quite a few sort of like attending records. Nothing is that heavyweight. In my experience, it doesn't take more than a minute or two. Let's have a look at chat. I still see, yes, Scott's warning and request for Bitcoin. And now that I've had some time to think about it, Scott, the answer is still no. Yeah. All right. Yes, so it's waiting on the gateway. I'm using a tool called Courier with a K, naturally. Courier is developed, I believe, by Red Hat, which should prove to you how cool and open I am since I work for a bit of crosstown rivals VMware. Mostly I chose it because it was the first thing that worked for me. So I had used Istio for a while. There was one conception that was true in the early days of Knative, that you need Istio to run Knative. That's not true at all. And certainly, in fact, there is a case to be made for not doing that, depending on your requirements. Istio is incredibly featuresome and powerful and deals with all sorts of fascinating problems and gives you all sorts of amazing features. But it can be overkill for the core necessity or the core requirement that Knative has, which is to sort of like receive bits at the edge of the cluster and then send them to the right container to be processed. And in fact, a lot of the sort of the overhead that people pointed to in the early days of Knative was sort of, it could be attributed to Istio, which was a bit like killing a fly with a sledgehammer. So Courier just does traffic routing. That's all it does. There are a number of others. There's one based on Contour, which is a VMware product, or a VMware sponsored product rather. There's Glue, Ambassador. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody else, and I'm very sorry for doing that. It's very rude of me. So let's have a look. Now I'm going to try running that kubectl apply again. That shouldn't take, he says optimistically, too long. So yes, I've created this service. Service list, we should now show it. Oh, default.example.com. So I've done something clever here. What have I done? What I was expecting was basically to get like a NIPIO address. And that's not what I'm getting. Okay, that's not interesting anymore. Values YAML. Okay, that's fine. I will take suggestions from the audience. What am I doing that makes me great? So I've got Courier data here, which is where, in the command line of my installation, I was sort of slurping stuff out, right? So I was using some JSON path magic. Let's see if I can get that to do what I expected here. Don't need that one. Okay, sure, I've got that. So why is that not then substituted? Because you'll see I do two deploys here. I do this, so it gets all the bits into place, and then I wait a little while, and then I patch it in situ. Did I leave the wrong one there? Oh, there's two of them. Okay. All right, so that's good. I mean, the nice thing about cap apply is that it is supposed to actually, as I said, sort of be quasi sort of ish idempotent. So what I expect now is that it will get rid of some of that additional stuff. I don't know how relevant that will be. Okay, those are all updates. Fine, none of those are very interesting. Reconcile, reconcile, reconcile. Okay, we're ignoring some stuff, and I'm ignoring it too. Okay, so I'm getting example.com, which is not what I wanted. So actually, it's worth mentioning that this example.com is actually the default for Knative. It will use example.com by default, which is great. It is in many ways the correct option. But I think the difficulty for me is that I assumed I would have magical IP mapping. And so far the magic has been unmagical. So this is what's supposed to happen, is that this is supposed to be rendered into here, right? This IP address value. And then that is supposed to in turn be slept out and turned into a sort of a thing here. So just for the sake of laziness, I am going to grab the IP and I'm going to do it by hand. So I see a question down here. Do you have any advice for structuring projects regardless of programming language or writing native code? That one's difficult. So most of what you get in different languages and different ecosystems is a matter of convention and idiom and ecosystem norms. And there are cases to be made to go outside of those norms, but very often the price is that people don't know how to navigate your code. So this is me basically cheating and throwing it back onto you. So for example, and saying like stick to what has been laid out as the norm. So if you are in Java land, you're going to stick to the sort of the file layouts that Maven and Gradle set up for you, where you have like source directory separated from a test directory. If you're in Golang, you want to have the _test.go files next to the things that they test. And in fact, all sorts of Kubernetes-centric code has additional idioms to do with how code is generated, because a lot of code is actually generated in Kubernetes universe, which I have feelings about that are irrelevant for today. But there are norms there. So if I'm looking at somebody's Kubernetes controller code base, I have a rough idea of where to start searching. So my main advice would be know the idioms, know the norms in that community. So now I have my IP address for the ingress to thingamajiggy, and how this is meant to render is that I get this.nip.io, and I do blank, and then there we go, blank. If I can press my keys correctly. It's interesting, I must be using the corner of my eyes to look at the keyboard, because with the microphone in the way, I'm making even more mistakes than usual. So I'm going to get rid of that, and we will do another cap apply because they are cheap and I like writing them. I like cap. Cap is my friend. Cap could be your friend too. Okay, chuggity chug. Now I'm wondering whether, okay, first things first, I'm going to try the service list again. No, so now I'm wondering whether I have to destroy that service and redo it. So delete, I think. Sockeye. Oh yeah, you can see where I've done stuff in the past. Sockeye. Ah, why you gotta be this way? That's not my favorite thing. So instead, I'm gonna find the kubectl apply. And I'm gonna turn that into a delete. Okay, there's my alarm telling me to check the chat. And it seems like folks are still doing what they were doing. So I will start a new one. Although actually, you know, I have the power of ADHD, so I notice things happening out of the corner of my eye anyway, even when perhaps I shouldn't. So I am going to do a delete. It says check the chat. So I'm not sure I fully, oh, yes, thank you. For a second, I was like, is there another chat I don't know about? In case you couldn't tell, this is my first stream. So I'm going to delete using kubectl. There may be some magic that I missed in terms of how that was constructed. And here's the thing too, like I'm now going to switch over to using kn directly to achieve what I wanted. So if you remember, I had all this information, but also, oh, Scott, why you got to use one of those things? So Scott has used a program called Co, which is enormously useful, but also doesn't give you the image per se. And now I have to refresh my memory of how that is meant to work. And oh, big guy, just go to releases, right? You've already done it. So dun 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 dun. None of these is releases. Why are you going to do this to me, GitHub? Like, I feel as though, there we go. They just sort of moved things around for the sake of moving things around. Maybe that's just me. So I'm going to look in release.yaml. Apparently I'm going to download release.yaml. That's not what I wanted. And that was about just opening that randomly because I'm like, what program will open? And so this is not like a private account here that I'm working on. It's my work account, but even so, you know, blah, 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 work secrets, whoops, for example. So have fun screen capping that. All right, so this is what I was looking for, is this bit of magic that I'm just going to do some copy pasta. And kudos to Scott for using the SHA digest. Okay, so I'm going to do kn service create, and I think it's image from memory. Let's see how that goes. Service create, service name is a single argument. Okay, I will call that Sockeye in a big twist. Okay, this is one of the things that's really nice about kn, is that you can get some feedback about what's going on while it constructs things, because nothing's instant in Kubernetes. You know, it's all loops that talk to loops that talk to loops. I'm feeling a little nervous about the ingress has not yet been reconciled. If I am, you know, giving a true confession, that makes me nervous. Looks like the webhook is not there. Yeah, you might be right, VLA, which is interesting. I expected it to be there. on the basis that most of the time cat works pretty well. So I've got the configurations there. I will take suggestions, Vile, on how what you think is a good troubleshooting step here to determine, apart from the configuration, whether I have like a working webhook. Michelle, I see, what are some conventions that make anyone a better programmer? I'm going to recommend 2 books to look at. One of them is very popular, is The Pragmatic Programmer. Has like lots of useful folkloric kind of insights and ideas that are worth studying. The other book I'm going to recommend is Code Complete by Stephen McConnell. Sadly, it hasn't been updated in a while. I really wish he'd do a 3rd edition, but the 2nd edition is still pretty fantastic. And the 1st edition of Code Complete was the book that made me realize that there was more to programming than just sort of smashing your hands on a keyboard until it worked. That there was, in fact, an entire sort of professional craft to it, and there were many things you could think about to make your code better. And it's very useful because it's a pretty encyclopedic sort of survey of all those sorts of things. Yeah, those are the 2 books, Pragmatic Programmer and Code Complete. Okay, so let's have a look at the land of services. All right, so first of all, let's see, get namespaces. What namespaces we have installed. So I have Knative Eventing. I'm going to say get all namespace Knative Serving. I like doing the long form arguments because I just want to wear my fingers out before I'm 80. Also, they're easier to read for people coming along later, in my experience. Okay, so I do see a webhook running. I assume that I can have a crack at seeing if I can pull up some logs. Logs. Is it like this? It's been a while since I've done this. Really? Oh, I need to do namespace. Yeah, so space Knative Serving, because it's not going to look in that namespace by default. I get this fairly dense kind of stuff. I'm not sort of seeing anything particularly shocking to me. I mean, I see a reference to sort of sockeye here. In the chat, I see Bokyo. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing how it ought to be. Is cap okay for handling multi-tenant Kates? That's a really good question. I don't know, is the short answer. Cap, in a sense, is fairly agnostic to what it. Let me back that up. Cap is fairly agnostic for the things which you apply it to. Like, it has a lot of heuristics built into it that it understands, for example, that CRDs should go first and so on and so forth. But it probably doesn't have, to my knowledge, strong opinions about tenancy patterns. Because the other thing, too, is that there are a bunch of ways of expressing tenancy. In Kubernetes, it doesn't have a native tenancy concept, which to me is one of the fatal sins of Kubernetes design. But there were good reasons for not having that in the beginning. So we're with it now. So by different ways of expressing tenancy, I mean using namespaces, using naming conventions and namespaces, installing a custom hierarchical namespace controller. A lot of folks just spin up entire clusters dedicated to particular apps. That's a pattern that's really common now. And in many ways, that's the best or firmest way to create tenancy separation. So it's really going to vary. So cap is going to be pretty good at the stuff that's within a cluster. So namespaces, naming conventions, and so on. I think off the top of my head, somewhat less effective at working with multiple clusters. Now, don't quote me on that because I haven't looked into that. So, good question. Thank you. Let's have a look. No, it doesn't look like we're having any luck here over here. I'm getting a bit stuck. Yeah, this is the joy, ladies and gentlemen, and all manner of folks, the joys of live coding. Especially when you only installed something this morning and thought, yeah, that'll probably work. On the other hand, I would have been panicking right up until we started recording, so maybe it's not that bad. Okay, does it work with the GitOps trend now? It's a good question. In the book, in chapter 9 of the book, I sort of give a simple worked example of a GitOpsy kind of flow and give opinions, as I am wont to do, about the nature of GitOps. Essentially, CAP is at the other side of the GitOps operation. So what you can do is you have created through some pipeline your intention as to what the cluster ought to look like, what you want it to look like, and that's what you're going to be committing to Git. So you're going to be rendering YAML through whatever process suits you, customize. CAP has a sister project called YTT, Q, Pulumi, Dal, there's a whole bunch of them. Or just doing it with strings because you hate your future self and you want that person to suffer. Once you've done all that rendering, you commit it to a Git repo of record, and this is like, this is what we want the world to look like. We want to have these services with this configuration. And that's where CAP comes into it. Presumably you would have some next step where CAP picks up that YAML and then turns to apply it, because CAP has a whole bunch of intelligence about how to do that effectively, how to patch things in place, and so on and so forth. So that's where CAP would fit into a GitOps sort of arrangement. It's basically a sort of a much smarter kubectl apply is one way of putting it, or at least that's what I'm using it for. There are other things in CAP, it's fairly featuresome, but that's the core of what it does, is applying and updating things. Okay, so we are still operating in a land of sadness and mystery, particularly because this ingress is not reconciling, which I would greatly have preferred to happen. So we're going to continue our debug hunt. So I am going to look again in the serving namespace. And I might also, after a bit, go and look in the courier namespace. So one of my other sort of hunches might be that somehow courier is confused. And this might be related to the fact that my script, my installation and update script, is not behaving as I expected. Worked flawlessly until now, but now is now and then is then. So let's have a look. 3-scale courier control. Interesting. So it's in the Knative Serving event. Okay, so it's got a cluster OP, it's got a deployment. So it seems as though it's running here. Or is that deployment? Let's have a look. KC get namespaces. Bum, 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 bum. I see courier system. Have a quick peek in there because I'm curious about what's there and not in Knative Serving. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, so that's where the actual software is running, is in courier system. So I'm going to grab the logs for that first of all. Logs, this thing, namespace, courier system. There we go. Diggity daggity doggity. Oh, yep. Okay, so kubeprobe makes a lot of sense, but not very informative. Oh, hello. What's this? Shutting down parent after drain. We cracked the case, Watson. No, I don't think this has turned out to be helpful at all, unless you're sort of like in the market for a fresh and exciting supply of UUIDs to, enrich your garden or whatever it is. Okay, so that wasn't very helpful. I'm going to Command K because my terminal's getting pretty full. And then I'm going to immediately regret it because then I have to pull stuff back up. Knative Serving. So I might look at this control thing. So a very common pattern in sort of Kubernetes land is having a separation between the control plane and the data plane. So often you'll have a piece of software whose job it is to receive configuration and act on it, and then another piece of software which is like the software. Sometimes this is called the operator pattern, or sort of like an elaborated version of it is called the operator pattern. So it might be that this controlling element has a better idea of what is heckity hacking at the moment. Diggity diggity there, serving. Did I mean that? Probably. What am I doing wrong? Oh, yes, namespace. You'd think software could read minds by now. Okie dokie. I don't really care about GitHub commit ID. No, nothing's really jumping out at me here, is the truth of it. So, okay. let me have a look at some of the discussion here while I wait for the back of my head to work things out. Is Kubernetes more lightweight than running headless VMs? Again, it goes back to who you are. If, quote unquote, someone else is running it at a level, like if you have an operations team, you're at a large company, or if you're using a hyperscaler, in this case, I'm using GKE, which gives me a thought that I'm going to look at in a second, then you, at some level, don't really care about the distinction. And in fact, a lot of sort of Kubernetes underpinnings or plug-in components for running containers are now running them as virtual machines because doing that through the Linux kernel has gotten a lot easier, and it has better security guarantees, really, to do it that way. But as a developer who's just using Knative, you more or less won't know the difference. Let's have a quick look. What CNI am I running? I have no earthly idea. And Vile, you're saying name robot face. That unfortunately is a bit of a puzzler for me. And Michelle, to explain like we're all five, what's happening is I don't know. Something somewhere is rotten in the state of Denmark, and Prince Hamlet here is trying to determine what that is. Yes, so I had a hunch, something that sort of sprung to mind a moment ago, and unfortunately I have to do it off screen because it involves a work account. So GKE has a sort of a setting or an option for Istio as like a supported automatic thing, which is really nifty, but it tends to get into slap fights if you're doing your own thing. So I set up this cluster this morning, and I did not check whether I had checked or unchecked the Istio box. Yeah. The meaning of life in 5 minutes. Ooh, how many 5 minutes do you have? Okay, sorry that I'm still on a different screen. Nothing personal. I hope you all understand. So let's see, Kubernetes engine clusters. Diggity-diggity-doo. For some reason, the GUI is a little slow today. But you do get to admire my thinning hair in profile. Okay, what have I got? Where is your thing? Oh, Istio disable. All right, well, there's that Hail Mary gone down. Well, not quite the tubes, but not where I was hoping for it to go. Okay, I can close that and release myself from potential danger. Oh, yes. Michelle, what I'm trying to achieve is actually to get to the starting line. So in the start of this discussion, I had been looking at a diagram from the book, and I wanted to sort of recreate this or recreate some of it. In the book, in the first chapter, this is a talked through example, so to speak. And I wanted to take a crack at implementing parts of it to make it do that, to have a hit counter that does it through at events and so on and so forth. And the first step I was taking was to set up a tool called Sockeye, which is this tool here. Sockeye is a very useful tool for checking that you have things connected together with CloudEvents. It provides a GUI, essentially, that lets you see. Is there a screenshot here? Shame on you, Scott. It gives you a graphical user interface in a web browser that you can use to inspect CloudEvents. You can send CloudEvents to it as one of those destinations, and it will come up. And the frustration has been is that now I've run into debugging Kubernetes / Knative, which is not what I was hoping to do, unfortunately. Okay, so Sockeye not ready. Yes, unfortunately, I know. So let's have a look at a little closer. Service describe, if I remember correctly, is the command. Sockeye. No. Yes. No. Yes. Yes. Okay, so what have I got? Ingress not configured. Now I have to refresh my memory. Yes, down the rabbit hole. I like the expression shaving yaks. This is definitely yak shaving territory. So this is where, for example, having done like a week of prep would have paid off, probably. Although then I would have just found different yaks, let's face it. Apparently this is a popular issue for people to report. And this rings a bell because one of the things you have to do is tell it that it's courier. Now let's see if that is in fact a thing. Well, it should be. Actually, I can also try and find this config map to see if it got applied the way that I think it should have been applied. So I can do where does it live? It lives in Knative Serving. So, and it's called config domain. So I'm going to go cm config domain namespace Knative Serving ing. There we go. That is not what I wanted. It's what I said, but it's not what I wanted. Describe. Okay. Oh, I'm still in the example. That is not what I expected at all. At all. Incidentally, you can see Cap here puts a bunch of metadata to help you keep track of things, which is pretty neat. So this is the example configuration. And that's a problem because the example configuration is not this configuration. This configuration is the one that tells all sorts of stuff. And actually, I'll have a look at config network as well. Config domain. So these are all configuration settings for Knative itself. They're mostly meant for the use of operators. But if you, as a developer, have installed Knative directly yourself, then there's a whole bunch of stuff under here. The defaults are basically okay 90% of the time, 99% of the time even. As I was sort of enthusing earlier, there are some very smart folks who've worked on this. So for reasons that are known best to the vengeful gods, this was not applied. It didn't get picked up by Cap. I have broken something or fatfigged something. Something is kaflooey, and that's a terrible shame. So I'm going to do the thing where I do it by hand. So I'm going to apply a file. Am I in the right place? Yes. And it's in the code directory. And what is it called again? Domain config map. Okay. So my hypothesis here is going to be that these things that you currently see on the screen on the right-hand side of my screen, which is the default out-of-the-box configurations, will be replaced, with the ones that I have provided. Qpaddle may in fact complain about me doing that. Yeah, so it's warning me at least that I shouldn't do what I just did. And in fact, Cap will be mad because I have moved things underneath it. And by doing this, I have destroyed the metadata that Cap does. So, don't do what I did. It's naughty and bad. But I done did it. And do I get an improvement? I do. Yay, the routes are ready. Okay, so this is what I expected. This is what I expected to happen 20 minutes ago, whenever it was that we started on our adventure today, which is that I would get this. NIP.io is one of those reflection services that's very helpful. Since I have this in the name that gets sent to the domain servers that are responsible for this top level domain, it will echo that back as the IP address. So it's a tremendously useful capability. And here we go. This is what I was getting to as my first intermediate, beginning, starting, doing stuff step towards the commencement of the journey. But we had to shave a herd of yaks first. So it doesn't look very exciting at the moment. And what I need to do is quickly consult my notes on the side, out of sight, which all look the same thanks to the magic of fonts. Yes, no, okay, where are you? What I'm looking for at the moment is a command that will tunnel into the Kubernetes cluster because, as I was saying earlier, CloudEvents player is very good at sending stuff within the cluster. I want to be able to do it from outside the cluster in the interests of I like terminals. And to do that, I have to tunnel into the inside of Kubernetes. Where are you? Here we go. All right. So, yes, this is a bit of a hack. And I hope you will not sort of derive life lessons from it. But this is a command that you can use in kubectl. And what it will do is it will essentially forward a port from on my computer into the inside of the cluster. If all of that seems unclear, I'm tragically sad. But mostly it's a hack. There are better ways of doing this if I wasn't doing a demo, or if I wasn't writing a book where the thing is really to demonstrate the principles. And I hope that administrators have set things up properly. So I'm going to sort of shrink that down there. Okay, so the important thing now is that I have the correct conditions, the routes are ready, configuration's ready, and ready. I'm going to get rid of this one because this is where I was doing a bunch of debugging. I don't need it anymore. This makes this much larger than I really care for. So I'm going to use command to make this full screen, and I'm going to clear it. Now, I, in my other terminal, have a port forwarded, and this is where I do some more copying and pasting from my other thing, which is where I'm actually going to create an event. And there are a bunch of numbers in here because I've copied and pasted code that has sort of like line numbers to specify things. You know what? Let's not do text editing in a, whatchamacallit, terminal. And all of you who are Vim fans can chew. I am not a Vim fan. I am a fan of real editors. Even though, unfortunately, there isn't really like an editor type for multi-line whatever. So these numbers are actually references that are used in the text, in the book itself. There's often a listing with numbers next to sort of things that I want to call out and discuss, and then underneath there will be a numbered list related to it. So I'm going to be mysterious here and not tell you anything just yet about what this magical incantation is doing. And, you know, in the interest of cheating, I'm going to sort of say, take a guess, take your best guess, have a crack in the comments about what you think I'm about to do. So again, here is the command I'm about to run. I'm using the fish shell, by the way. That's why I got rid of that dollar symbol. And I'd be interested in your guesses. I'd be interested in also what you think will show up momentarily, if Alt-Tab will work for me. Cool, I can't see it anymore. Oh, because it's on the other screen. Too many screens. What we're going to see in here in a second. Okay, since you're all putting up the hands in the class, create a new event. Yes, exactly. So, you know, you'll remember that I've got a tunnel there, and default is some magic we'll discuss in a moment. But these are the 4 core fields that you're going to have on every single cloud event in order to be a cloud event. I'm using HTTP for my HTTP requests. I just do that because I'm a bit of a hipster, as you can tell. And because curl's command line is, I don't know, it's a thing. I never feel like I understand that I never feel like the thing I reach for in curl is the thing I wanted. Like I'm constantly sort of having to learn, like they must be well into sort of, you know, secondary pre-Greek in alphabets by now to express all the different command line flags. Okay, so one of the nice things about it is I get this really pretty return thing, and one of the not nice things about it is that I'm seeing internal server error. Why do I see internal server error? I felt very strongly that that would not be the case. Oh, why are you clipping that? That's just mean. Okay, what do we have? Internal server error. This is an example. That's what I said. I guess one question is, did it ever show up in CloudEvents? No, it didn't, because I have not told anything to target it, right? So that's entirely my fault. One thing about this apparatus is that I sent it to the default broker. It's slightly obscured by this URL, but essentially this will pick a service called default. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Ville. And essentially I'm looking, default namespace, and in this case, the default broker in the default namespace. So brokers are an important part of the universe of Knative Eventing. As the name suggests, they receive things, they do clever stuff with it, and then they send them to a different place. And the most important things that exist are triggers. So right now I can say a whole bunch of stuff. I can say, what brokers do you have? Sorry, let me say it again. What brokers do you have? No brokers. Well, that's probably a bad sign. That might be why. As a starting position, I don't have a broker. So do I have create? Let's try create default. Okay, that sounds plausible. Default successfully created in namespace default. Okay, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to try sending that cloud event again. So I got a 500 because there was nothing listening. And that's entirely my fault. I think I will get a 202 this time, like an accepted message back. Because the broker doesn't have to do anything with your cloud event. It can just accept it. Hey, I was right. Okay, and we should still not see anything in CloudEvents, in Sockeye rather, because I haven't wired it up. So the broker is the first step. And what does a broker do? The broker's job is to hold essentially a collection of what are called triggers. The trigger is two components, and I probably have a pretty diagram here, which lets me wave a mouse pointer at it enthusiastically. Let me just scroll through my diagrams on the other side. I would do it in front of you, but that would ruin the magic. No, that. These are all very interesting, Jacques, but they're not what I want. Wow, that one's got a lot of parts. Yeah, that might be it. Okay, yeah, this is more or less what I'm talking about. So the broker is, you can sort of think of as this jagged box here, and inside the box are what are called triggers. Each one of these gray boxes represents a trigger, and within each trigger there are two components. There is the filter, which is some criteria saying I'm interested in messages with this characteristic or shape or what have you. And then there's the subscriber. It's like, if it shows up, where does the message go? So right now the broker happily took the cloud event that I submitted. It didn't do anything with it because there are no triggers. And I can verify that by asking KN. I should have trigger list. And behold, no triggers were found. Now, if I remember correctly, I also have a trigger create. Now, let's have a look at this. Trigger create Sockeye source. Well, yes, okay, source. Filter source equals combo example. Okay, and sync Sockeye. So let's do this for the moment. Okay, so now I have a trigger. I can look at that. And what happens? So the first thing that I would probably do is to try my post again. I know for a fact it's going to fail, but I often like to see things fail. I know that sounds really weird. Like a big part of test-driven development is, does the thing fail? And if it fails, did it fail in the way I expected it to fail? You never really know if your test tests something unless you test your test. And I don't mean like write test for your test. I mean like just poke it with a stick and, sort of like flip a plus to a minus in your code and see if the test detects it, that sort of thing. Okay, so this is a thing. And the reason that I had this problem, if I look at this, is source. I have /example/source, but in my command here, I said source would be com.example.sockeye. Right, so, oh, interesting. I'm using different styles for type and source in these two different things. Don't do that. This means that at the moment, if I send the event I've been sending with ce-source /example/source, it doesn't match anything, right? There's no match in the list of triggers. And so the broker says, cool story, dude, and just ignores it, basically drops it on the floor. I mean, the implementations can vary. You can have different brokers, but the one I'm thinking of more or less does this, unless I'm wrong. Scott points out this is where Graph would help me visualize what I was making. I promise I will try it. I really promise. Okay, so what we can do real quick. Oh, that was unhelpful. I didn't want that to go away at all. I wanted to be able to see that. Com example Sockeye. Okay. Ding, 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 ding. Com.example Sockeye. I should get a 202. And what I expect now, is to see the event. So what's happened? What's happened is I have sent an event from my terminal. It has tunneled through Blackmagic into Kubernetes, where it has reached the broker. The broker has looked at it and said, okay, I see a source and I see a type. And we had said, if anything with this source comes in, send it to sockeye. Now, that was the gist of this command. We basically said, if you see source equals this, then the sync is sockeye. And you can just use the name of it. You can also use a URL. You can do a whole bunch of stuff, actually. It's really quite convenient. But in this case, I just said, just send anything with this event type to sockeye. So now we can send stuff to sockeye from our terminal, which was the first thing. Thank you, Relay. I'm also excited that we wanted to achieve. I am going to take a second to have a look at Graph because, you know, I haven't tried it. But after we do that, I will try to go back and I might actually, you know, write some code just for laughs. Okay, I'm going to turn this into a pinned tab because I feel like I'm going to come back to it a bunch of times. Was ist das? Oh, right, this is CloudEvents player, also excellent. And sockeye, also sockeye. Here we go. All right. Visit the root of the graph service in a web browser. All right, let's see how we go. Diggity ding. Yeah, okay. Do that over there. Make that full screen again. There we go. All right. Oh, Matt, you're telling me there's an example one? Ah, you registered DuckDuckOn.io. That's fantastic. Well, it's too late. I've already pressed enter. We're committed now. There's no turning back. Okie dokie. One piece of advice I guess I would have is like, tell me what the URL will be when I get to the other side. Because right now, I mean, I have a rough idea that it's a service, but I didn't know that in advance. Okay, so can service list. And there we go. I've got graph.default, etc. Oh, that's nice. Okay. So I got broker default, got the ingress. Oh, that's really cool. Nice. I like that. That is some sweet work. Thank you, Scott. That is really very helpful. So I am definitely I can click the boxes and I get a much prettier font if I do. I like that. Well, that email address is not as accurate as it used to be, but it'll still work for people who are planning to send me stuff. Okay, I'm not caring about cap at this stage. All right, so graph is pretty cool. Why don't I have a back button though? Oh, because it's a pop-up. Okay, that makes me sad. I'm gonna click on this one. Neat. Yeah, I like this. So this is helpful. So let's add that to our list of things that I'm going to pin. You need different favicons though. That would make life easier for me because I'm just going to be doing this like, which one was it again? Oh, it's a different fish. That's a nice touch. Okay, so graph is pretty cool. We're definitely going to keep that with us on our adventure. The first thing I would like to do now though is to stand up essentially any sort of web thing that serves something. So in the book, I do this, if I remember correctly, in chapter 9. So I'm going to pull up my copy here because I has a lazy, and by here, I mean over here. So blah, blah, blah. It doesn't render properly in the PDF, which is a shame, but it does on the website, I promise. Yeah, so I just have this cheapo, lazy, quick, dirty, nasty sort of arrangement that I'm going to do some copy pasta with. And I'm going to do that in Goland because it's a real ID. And he says right after he breaks it. Good work, fella. All right, there we go. What hath I brought? Okay, so I got a little bit of thing there. I should be able to do inject language. Yeah. HTML. What do you mean? Yeah, I want to permanently inject it. Okay. As if not know the spelling of Knative by now, computer. Really. All right, so there's a log line, which I'm not really going to bother with because I know what I'm doing, right? Okay. And this is where having co is actually really useful. And now I'm sort of scratching my head. Do I have co installed or do I want to create an image with bill packs? How did I do it? Oh, I closed chapter 9. That's why I can't see where it is. That's no longer interesting. Shoot. Dun, 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 dun. So in chapter 9 of the book, I gave an example of using build packs because I'm a bit of a pro build packs lunatic. Do I have Co installed? I do. It's probably a truly ancient version that comes with a warning. Okay. Yes, I do drop things. Co. Do we have it in Brew? First, let me update everything in the universe. I don't see it, so I think it's one we install by hand-ish. So, what is Co? It's kind of hard to describe in... No, it's not Coca-Cola. That's the problem with creating like a new web user, is that it assumes that you are part of the unwashed masses rather than the elite programming, blah, blah, blah. Stop me before I hurt myself. Yeah, so the thing that's really nice about Co is it makes it very easy to work with Go programs and to very quickly iterate on those programs running on Kubernetes. And the source of that magic is this thing here, which is that in a normal sort of a Kubernetes scenario, when you provide the image name, you actually have to provide a proper, OCI or Docker image reference. This computer trying to go to sleep. Stop it. Whereas in this case, what you actually provide is essentially an import path that Go would recognize. And Co sort of takes this, works out how to turn it into an image that runs commands, all this kind of jazz, and then can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. So I'm going to use Co because I want to get shiny things going. It's a lot of fun to see how badly lagged I am at the moment on the stream. There we go. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to do this because I'm using, well, I'm not really using GCR, but actually I reckon I will because I don't want to deal with Docker right now, like Docker Hub. Local repository, kind is really awesome. Co-publish. Yes. Where are my installation instructions at? Installation. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. Go get. Not my favorite thing in the universe, but I often complain about Go and Go related subjects, as people who know me know. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, let's have a look at chat, see if I'm missing anything. Okay, so far so good. I dropped package main like it was hot, Matt. Okie dokie. Oh yes, one of the things that I don't enjoy very much about working in Kubernetes land as a programming endeavor is that at some point you always wind up importing half of the Kubernetes universe, which is big. Okay, so let's have a look at Co version 6.2, and it's not giving me any warnings. I take that as a good sign. And if I refresh my memory, apply to the input files with image references resolved to build pushed image digests. Okay, so I am going to go back to Scott's repository because it had an example of what I want to do, which is a piece of YAML that creates a Knative service and does magic-y magic to convert it. So let's go back to Goland, both the software and the state of mind. I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call this service.yaml in the interests of vagueness. And of course, I am not using that one. Oh, I see, this is going to be a hassle because I don't really feel like setting up a repo today. If I'm perfectly sincere. Let me have a look at Co. Can I just not bother? Can I just say, what's the Go module? That's a good question. Oh, I don't have one. Well, that was silly of me. So let's create one. So I'm in this one. I'm going to call it Go mod. Stream is really awfully generic. So let's say Twitchy. no, not go mod twitchy, init twitch e. Okay, so I've got a go model, go mod here. It's module twitchy. So I'm guessing that the idea is that it's like co:// and that'll do the right thing. Like it'll pick up the path from like the Go context path, whatever it's called. I'm looking right up. Yeah. All right. Let's give it a whirl. Place your bets. Place your bets. Okay. So I'm going to do co-apply. And what I need for co-apply is, that's not what I wanted. I see. No, I still need to be set up with a registry, don't I? Right. You know what? Let's just try it. Let's just try co-apply service YAML and see what happens. Just see what happens. And what happens is kaboom. And that would be because I didn't use the -f command. Co-docker repo environment is unset. I'm going to have a feeling that this is one of those did you read the documentation sort of moments. Data is there, code there, docker login. See, there was a mention of like GCR before, and now it's somewhere else. Here we go, usage. Okay, need to be docker login. I got to admit, this is where I would add a step sort of saying like, this is the command you ran next, if that makes sense. So I've like done configure docker sometime here in the distant, sorry, I'm sitting away from the microphone, in the distant past. So I could basically just do usgcr.io. And so it'd be something like, let me see, I'm going to co-docker repo. And that's the value I want. That is not what I expected to happen. Or is it set? It's been a while. So let's see if I can get that back. Code. Okay, good. And now let's try applying it. So what I'm hoping for it to do is to use my credentials on GCR, Google Container Registry, if you're wondering, to push an image into it. I need a project ID. Interesting. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I will update that. So what is my project ID? And does it reveal any juicy secrets that I shouldn't? I don't think it does. From memory, I'm going to just sneak off stage for a second to have a look at that. If and when this will do what I want. Yes, there we go. There's the normal terminal, by the way. It doesn't have that cool guy just like posing. He was chosen because he was described as Francais. And he definitely has the vibe. So I'm coming over here because I want to check with gcloud. What is the name? I think it's just config, isn't it? No? List? Just want to get the name of my project. Okay, yeah, so this is fine. There's no mysteries there. Okay, so that's just a sandbox that I have, and I don't know who that Jacques Chester person is, or if it's a person, who knows, could be a robot. And make sure that that's it, the way I thought it did, and we'll give it another whirl. That looks promising. Yeah, there go the blobs. Pew. Oh. Kubectl should not be used on a thing. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, did I just... you know what I did, which was kind of silly? I didn't change names of things. So now I have written over the top of Sockeye, which is colossally dumb. I wanted to call it Twitchy. So I am a silly sausage. So let's have a look. KN service list. Service create. And I'm trying to remember, did I use create or did I use the YAML? I think I used the YAML. Okay. So what I will do is I will reapply the relevant YAML. and idempotency and magic and other things you can put in your resume, and it'll get smashed back into the shape I had originally. At least that is the theory that I am holding out all hopes for. But it will have forgotten. This is the thing, by the way. It will have forgotten the things that it received. There's no kind of like guaranteed distributed log that you get with Kafka or what have you. Once it's delivered into wherever it goes, the cloud event, I mean, it's your problem. Okay, so I have Socko running, and I have Twitchy running somewhere. I think I should probably just be able to, like, Twitchy. Wiping. Oh, what is this? Writing my feelings. Ugh. Oh, because I haven't done the co-apply yet. Let me double check that I didn't fat finger it again this time. No, that looks more promising. And we will do another co-apply. Send a PR. Oh yeah, but like work. Okay. Now let's try our luck with Twitchy. There we go. Hello, Knative. We made it. Still not very exciting. For one thing, it does not have any sort of a hit counter. And this breaks at least my heart. I don't know about yours. So really we were sort of a fork in the road. I could have gone down the road of doing, let me pull this diagram back up so that you know what I'm talking about. And also so that I know what I'm talking about. Yes, the joys of having everything in PNGs and also in SVGs, and then trying to find the thing that you wanted in a directory. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is where we sort of started. I could have started with like the hit counter and been sending events to it directly, or I could start with this one. At the moment, I just have one that most resembles the homepage server. So I'm going to sort of like put that down for a second, and I'm going to create another service. And this service's purpose in life will be to receive cloud events. Before I do that, I'm going to do two things. One is that in a second I'll take a break, just for a couple of minutes, and you can too. And two, the other thing I'm going to do before I do that has slipped my mind entirely. Hooray. Come on, brain, work with me here. You know what? It is probably not that important. Does anyone else feel this way? It's been a long everything. Oh yes, is to talk about what the heck a cloud event is, actually, because I realize I've just sailed past that topic and assumed that everybody had read their notes before the class. Is it Cloud Events or CloudEvent.io? Looks like events. So in the book, I give sort of a made-up fictional tale in the tradition of annoying made-up fictional tales to introduce the concepts of what a cloud event is, and more to the point, why you would have a cloud event. The core of the cloud event is that it would be super nice if different systems were interoperable, and that to achieve this interoperability, a major thing that must be achieved, a major necessity or requirement, is that there is agreement about the names of metadata fields and what is legal content in those metadata fields. And this is important because most systems do have a distinction between the payload of something and the metadata about like how to route it, how to send it places, so on and so forth. So let's actually look at that. One of the ways to send a cloud event is as a piece of JSON, right? So I will turn this into JSON. And there were basically four things you need. You need a spec version, which refers to the version of cloud events. You need an ID, which can be dun 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 anything, but should be unique. So perhaps anything, bang, 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 bang is not going to work for you. You need type. Yes, all right, I'm sorry, I forgot. Type, which again can be anything, but there are conventions which suggest that you should sort of follow a reverse domain format. And then source, which is the logical place where the event comes from. Okay, and that could be a number of things. That could be a domain, right? Let's make this example.com. Don't want to make anybody grumpy. Git commits. So these are the 4 required fields. The hard rules are that spec version has to be 1.0 until some new version comes out. There, you'll see references sometimes to version 0.3, which was one of the intermediate versions. 1.0 is what you should be doing now. ID, the rule is you should make it unique. This is because any systems in between, where the image first emerges into the light blinking and where it ends up is allowed to deduplicate on ID. So if you're reusing the ID for different events, it's very possible that a bunch of them will be mistakenly dropped. Easiest way to achieve this, in my opinion, and best way is just to use UUIDs. There's libraries for every language in the universe and then some. So just use UUIDs. Type and source are really sort of up to you. So these do not have to be unique per event. These are sort of like ways of categorizing events. So the type is going to belong or be connected to your internal sort of taxonomy or ontology of what you think the universe is, the domain model. So if you ran a Git hosting sort of thing, you might say that I have a concept, a type called commit, or actually even better, since we're talking really about events rather than static things, you might say something like a push. Right, so I have com.example.git.push. So this might be like, it says this is event, the contents of it are meant to be interpreted as git push events. CloudEvents makes no statement about what that means. Like, it doesn't create semantics. You creating a name here won't create magic logic somewhere that understands that this is a git push and deal with it differently. It's just a key that we use to that you use in your software to route things. You remember earlier when we created the trigger, I had a setting, trigger list, and can trigger describe sockeye source. You may recall that I said source equals com.example.sockeye. And that was matching a source I could match on type just as easily. What you should be putting in type is like the kind of thing, and what you should be putting into source is the sort of the place, the logical place where it came from. Like, source should not be used for things like server 127-alpha 14, right? Don't use it to sort of identify the physical origins of something per se, more the logical origins. So this is, in this case, I use sort of example.com/API/git commits. On the theory that somebody looking at this event can understand that the origin was the API that could be found at this address. Now, again, the values in type and source and ID, for that matter, are not constrained. You don't have to follow a format. You can put anything more or less there that you like. My advice is that for type, you should be using reverse domain notation a la Java. For source, you should definitely consider using either a URL, a proper URL. So in this case, that would be https example.com/API git commits. Or alternatively, if you have some other way of segmenting the world. So it might be, for example, that you're on Amazon and you've got an ARN for a group of resources. It's been a while since I looked at AWS. Every time I do, I'm like, why are there 50 billion consoles that don't talk to each other? And why do I have to copy and paste everything to do anything? But that's another rant. So this is sort of like enough to be a cloud event. Typically, though, what you're really interested in is actually putting stuff into the cloud event, right? So where is my note? I want to make sure I'm not going to mislead you in a second. Well, actually, yes, I already did this, right? So earlier on I did HTTP. That's not there. I did this using a slightly different sort of encoding or transmutation for the cloud event. And then I said message, this is an example. And what I got essentially was that I could put that anywhere. And that's more or less what happens. Anything that you put in that isn't sort of directly recognized becomes anything you want, right? This is where you're putting your data. I feel uncomfortable about that claim. I'm not sure I'm actually steering you right there. Let me double check. No, I'm not steering you right. This was different because in this case I was using HTTP headers to capture those top level metadata, and then the body would have just been a chunk of JSON. So I may be full of it, and that's okay. I can look at the CloudEvents specs and prime it. The primer is excellent, by the way. Read it. I must insist. If you really want to get your head around CloudEvents, it's very thorough, and the spec is very thorough. Perhaps too thorough for our purposes today, but the CloudEvents is pretty important. Now I have to remember JSON, command Fing, my way to glory. How are they doing? Okay, yes, now I remember, yes. So by convention, you have a data field if you ship it as a single blob of JSON, as opposed to shipping it as a blob of JSON inside an HTTP request. If that's confusing, that's only because it's confusing. So the equivalent to what I have on the left-hand side of this screen, where I did an HTTP post and set some HTTP headers, and then just had a little chunk of JSON in the message body, in the request body rather, is going to be something more like this. I have a field called data, and inside that is an object, and that's where I would say message, this is an example, right? And that would be more or less approximately, modulo the exact values, more or less the same thing, with a slightly different encoding. There are a couple of different ways of encoding cloud events. The important thing to remember, though, is that all cloud events must have these 4 keys on them. Those must have values, and you should follow the guidance on what they're done. And most importantly, if the ID is not unique, you are in a world of pain, or you will be. And more to the point, it will be invisible pain, because things will just vanish when you least expect it. Scott points out in discussion that the term that gets used in cloud events in the documentation is this idea of structured versus binary mode. Now, if I remember correctly, which one is binary? Which one's... Okay, so let's have a look. Binary mode, HTTP. Okay, so binary mode uses the headers. Yes, excellent. Yeah. So there's these 2 sorts of quote unquote modes. If, for example, you wrote software where you couldn't set HTTP headers, but you could create a blob of JSON, right? That would be called structured, right? Because you provided all the additional structure inline, so to speak, to make it work. Whereas if you are able to set headers yourself through your software, then you're using the facilities that are provided by whatever protocol you have in mind to annotate it with those fields, and that would be a binary mode in the sense that what goes into here, what goes into here could be anything. And that's the other thing too. It could literally be binary. Like I've used a JSON blob. Actually, is that true, Scott? Or am I making things up? Does it have to be textual or JSONic or something there? For safety, let's assume yes for the moment. 1 second. There are a lot of other things. Oh, wow. That was an awful sound. Binary mode means anything. Okay, that's really cool. I hadn't thought of that before. Interesting. Yeah, so you could sort of see applications where you send small chunks of things around. And whether that's what you want to do or not, I guess, is something to be left to the conscience of each individual churchgoer. There are a number of other fields that you can set optionally on a cloud event. So those 4 are the absolute minimum, excuse me, that was rude, the absolute minimum that you can have and still be conformant. Oh yeah, there it was. But also there are, if I remember correctly, there were like common attributes. Is that it? Where does it live? I just cheat and look in there. Yeah, there's sort of like the additional attributes here. And then there is a list of the other things elsewhere that you can do. Extensions, I believe, is what I'm looking for. Yeah, so there's these extensions. So these are not required in the same way that the sort of the core 4 are, but the idea is that you can have still well-specified, well-understood keys that have a particular interpretation in the context of a cloud event system. So, the idea is that your events may not remain within your system. Actually, that sounds terrible putting that way. But, for example, if you have a multi-cloud operation, congratulations on your conference talks, but also you will often want to get events that come from AWS and come into Azure, or leave Azure and go into, a BigQuery table in Google, whatever floats your boat. So your event, as generated in the initial universe, you can't rely on the assumptions that everybody will interpret all of your flourishes the same way outside of the core 4. So by setting these additional optional sorts of keys that a conforming system should know about, you have additional flexibility and capability without having to force every one of your events to carry a whole bunch of overhead. So for example, distributed tracing is just moi for so many things these days because we don't have stuff running in a single process that can be debugged anymore. So setting trace headers is sort of described. You get trace parent, trace state. From memory, this is based on the W3C standard. Partitioning is really helpful. That's where you sort of set a key that says this is a way to chop up my data more efficiently. Okay. And so on. So apart from those 4, there are a number of additional things that can be added. I'm going to focus on those 4, like core 4 today, because that's all I really need for what I'm doing. And that's what I'll do. So I'm going to take a quick break because despite what you may have heard in legend, I am only human. So I have this extremely tasteful screen here. And I'm waiting for my extremely tasteful screen to appear in my little window down there where I'm watching my face. Oh yeah, there's me making silly faces. What a charming fella. I've got this helpful screen here. This is basically just going to say that I will be back and I will see you in a couple of minutes. Please feel free to take this time yourself and I will be back shortly. Right, so we've talked a little bit about CloudEvents. We've enjoyed a joint interactive debugging session, which has been really a highlight of my life. But what I would like to do now, I think I would like to have a hit counter. I want to have a piece of software that if I send it a cloud event of any kind, really, but we'll come up with some type, counts them, comes up with a number, right? So going back to Goland, here we go. I'm going to start with this one, right? I'm just going to render something into that because I can. So I've got fprintf there, which means I should be able to set a variable on it. And it would be something like hits blah. And I think I'd be like D. It's been a while. Okay, so let's see how that goes. Bottom ching. Also, I'd take a chance, moment to say thank you everybody who's tuned in so far today. Did I already say that? I did. Well, I'll say it again. Thank you. Okay, so we've updated, and you've also seen why code is so cool, because it can do that really quickly. And if I go back to Twitchy land, take a little second because it's got to spin up a copy. There we go, hits 190, and that's because I hard-coded that number. That's not the real number. That's a phony baloney fake number. What would be much more interesting is if I could listen. This is where I always get confused when I'm working on Go, because there's always like handler and handler func and func handler, and we got the funk, funky town. Like my brain starts to melt usually when I'm doing these, which is a pity, because actually once it's working and you got your head sort of cued into it, it's pretty convenient. So what do I want to do? I want to have some sort of a variable. Let us call it count, and it equals 0 to start with. And into here, I'm going to put count, and I'm going to increment it first of all. Apparently, I can't do that. Why can't I do that? I would have felt very strongly that I could do that. Is this, maybe it's like I can't close over the variable. Give me a second. It's been a while since I... This is the problem when you program with a bunch of different languages. They all get blurred together in your head. So that goes there. It's not going to be mad at me. Apparently it is. I'm guessing I can't have side effects in here. Yes, whatever. Okay, so I think I can do this. Incidentally, this is in no way, shape, form, etc. At all a good idea. What I just did, just do it outside the FRNF. Yes, that's what I should have done. I was too greedy. I wanted too much. Yeah, what I did, of course, is hilariously thread unsafe. So shh. But we're not trying to be perfect here. We're just trying to be good enough. In a second, what I should get is hits 0, I think, or hits 1, which is more accurate. Unless it doesn't do what I expect it to do. Why? You got to be this way. Ding, 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 ding. Count number. We made it. Is it a different place? Or is it just that the old one hasn't gone away yet? There we go. Okay, that makes more sense, although it is increasing by 2 more than it is ought to. So there's a bug in there already. Hooray. Isn't that swell? I'm going to ignore it anyway for the moment and worry about the mystery of the double dipping in a minute. What I want to do is set up another endpoint. So my theory here is going to be that I have something like a count event, and that if somebody sends that, something to that, hit event to it, that it will then update this count variable. It is because the browser asks for the favicon. Yeah. Favicons. That brings back memories of trying to find things in WordPress logs and just having acres of favicon spam. And yeah, that's a whole experience. There are many things that I come back to in the land of WordPress experiences. So handler func is a singleton. Okay, yeah, that's right. It just registers it straight on the package if I remember correctly. So handle func, and you pattern event sync or event target, or just event hell, but not before I. Yeah, there we go. That's what I want. Right, it works for me. Well, it's kind of interesting. I would have thought that they would try to follow the Go conventions of being cryptic and just doing W and R, but they decided to be more Java-y. I prefer the Java style myself, but we're trying to be vaguely idiomatic here. So in fact, if I receive an event here, I'm going to say count ++. I'm going to update the variables there. And so if I redeploy this now, then I should not get that counting. It should basically just stay at 0 constantly from now until the end of all time. Or until I change the code. Whichever comes first. Diggity daggity doo. Okay. I'm going to go back here. And Yep, there's a slight delay while it deals with, okay, so I'm still looking at the old version. So there's one thing that happens in Knative is it can sometimes take a few moments for the routes to switch over. There you go. So now it hits 0 no matter what I do. So what I'm going to try next is to send an event. Oh, well, no, I can't. I need a trigger first. So first things first, I need a trigger. I need trigger, create. Let us call it hello. You see, now I've forgotten all the things. Sync. Okay, what is that service called? KN service list. Twitchy. How could I forget a name like Twitchy? KN trigger create all this stuff. And I'm going to be lazy and just edit things in place, which is terrible, terrible practice, incidentally, because as you saw earlier, you can forget to edit something and then blow something away. Just do what I say, not what I'm doing. I'm going to call this Twitchy filter. Is that what I want? Yeah. Trigger. Sorry. Twitch trigger. Ha ha ha. And I think I'm going to filter on type. I'm not interested really in the source. I could be, but what I'm really interested in is the type. So I'm going to say something like com.example.webhit. So anything that's called webhit will be sent to Twitchy. Okay, so now we got that. Now I can set up my thing. So what I'm going to do is send of type com example web hit. I'm going to say source friends of, actually, you know what? GeoCities.com. And I'm not going to bother with the body. I'm just going to send the headers. That's all I'm going to do. Right? Because there's not really anything interesting I'm carrying in this hit material. It might be later on, that you carry a bunch of other information, rendering time, I don't know where they came from, what they ate for breakfast this morning, the kinds of things that Google and Facebook are able to divine. But all I'm really interested in right now is the count, and that means I only need the headers to establish the existence of this thing. So let us try that. Okay, I got a 202 accepted, and if I go to my module and do this, then I'm wrong. That hasn't done what I expected it to do at all. Why not? What madness is this? Source version trigger com example webhead sync Twitchy. Oh, because it's going where? No, it sends it to the root, doesn't it? So okay, this is where I want to look at the trigger documentation. So trigger create help dung 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 dung. Yeah, I'm slightly befuddled by this. What I wanted to do was to send it. Oh, I need a URI. So what I can do instead is, first of all, get rid of the trigger that I have. So trigger delete and Twitchy. Okay, what did I call it again? Come on, brain, work with me here. Twitch trigger. It's the small things that get you. Okay, create. Oops, trigger create. Twitch trigger sync. And this time, instead of giving it just a name, I'm going to give it the sort of the URL, which, if I remember correctly, was /event. This is something that is worth highlighting. You can use either a direct URL for your sync address, or you can use the name of a thing in Kubernetes. And I'm being deliberately vague there. Basically, it has to be a thing that Knative knows how to turn back into a URL. So when I said Twitchy, it was a Knative service, and Knative knows pretty well how to take the reference to a Knative service or the name of a Knative service and to convert that back into a URL under the hood. In this case, I want sort of like tighter control, so I'm using the URL. So my expectation now is that the sync will go to that /event and that it should do what I want it to do. Okay, I didn't have to update my code, you'll notice. Oh, duh, I have to send the event. That's right, this is not where it's doing it. Send that. From GeoCities, Veil. Ah, see? Okay, so now we've got to the point where I can update. Oh, hello, it looks like I can become famous by followers, primes, and viewers. Spam, you're wonderful. None of the point where I can actually have something resembling loosely a hit counter. And I'm going to just cheat and use the same software to... Should I have it send it to itself? That seems like cheating. I really ought to actually just have another process, but then it has to keep the count. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways I could do this. One would be that it sends an event and it just happens to be the same software that receives the event. And that would work. It would be more interesting to have another process though. So being aware of the time, it's 3 o'clock. So I might push on for about another half an hour to an hour, depending on how long my Ritalin lasts. So right now I haven't done anything fancy, so I'm going to like make the, let's see, homepage. And I'm also going to make head counter. I'm going to move main into homepage. Okay. And service will have to be updated as well. So I'm going to move service into homepage. Okay. And GoMod's still there. And the reason for this is, yes, I know, very confusing. The reason for this is going to be that I want one, which is the homepage, which says, hi, hello, how are you? What's happening? I will probably just replace this with a little bit of JavaScript. And over in hit counter land, I will have the events. And in fact, I will change this from keeping its own count to, what is the word I'm looking for here? Emitting an event. I actually want this to emit an event, not just to receive them. So actually, let's do that first. Like, let's do the circular one first. It just reduces the amount of fiddly-faddly, if I may be technical. And it's a bit of a hack, and you shouldn't do it, but you can do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and send. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I have to get my hands on, is the CloudEvents libraries. So CloudEvents has quite a few SDKs available for different languages. Since I'm in Go, I want the Go SDK. And I'm probably just going to add that to... I don't want to do go-get. I want to do... Is it go mod install? Mod... Go mod download? I always forget this. Oh, why are you going to be this way, brain? And I think also it just reads the code, so I can probably just go yoink and take this one and drop that in situ. Oops, daisies. There we go. Oh, don't get rid of it yet. I'm going to use it, I promise. Okay, here we go. Okay, and what do I get with that? Is part of my question. Import it, Go mod download. Yes, that's right. Thank you. Because Go reads source code because it does. Okay. I shouldn't be so harsh on Go. Like, it's been a really important sort of alternative and a boon to the industry. And at the time it was created, there wasn't really anything quite like it. Like, it fit a niche that was really important. Okay, so the default client is HTTP, which is what I want. Okay, and I'm going to take my source code and fat finger. There we go. I'm going to smash it over to one side. Get rid of all this nonsense because I'm not using it right now. No, I don't care about that. Thank you. And on the other side, I'm going to hold a window open with documentation. What I ought to do in the interest of time is copy and paste this. But you know what? Ding, 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 ding. CloudEvents dot new default client. Oh, already I'm in trouble. What have I done wrong? Receive you first, send you first. What have I got in the CloudEvents package? That was not Hey, really? Okay, so I think I should have used like the option it gave me to have Go mod integration rather than just going like, go away. As I did, because now, I've got Golang being confused about things. This is your opportunity, by the way, everybody, to, mock me for using an IDE after I sort of like hung over the top of everybody. So go mod tidy, just like my I don't understand it. Magic, do magic button. Okay, integration. Yes, I do want that. Thank you. Okay, indexing. It is redundant. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's try that again. CloudEvents. Still, is the index up to date? I believe it is doing some chunky indexing down the bottom. So I'm just going to ignore it while it does that. And I am going to do typing like they used to do. Which is to say badly, and with a whole bunch of typos. Oh yes, my personal favorite, if error equals null. It's so like universal that Golang has about 20 different things for it. Yeah, I guess I should probably do a fatal F, Kaflooey. I can do a better one another time. I'm already bored at typing this stuff out. Sorry. What is C? Where is that going to be used, I wonder? I see it gets used in the send. So I got to admit, I'd probably be inclined to do an event first. What am I missing? Is there some relation there? I don't think there is. So I'm going to make the event first and do my thing. I want to copy and paste the values I had before, which were yon. Okay, so I had type, webhit, and GeoCities as the source. Okay, type, kaping, and then geocities.com. This is inauspicious right now. Okay, great. No, it's still indexing. That's why. Gee, it's kind of slow on the indexing today. It's almost as if I'm rendering gigantic video at the same time as using a powerful and powerful and comfortable tool that also happens to be a bit thirsty. Okay, so I've created my event. In fact, I'm just going to call this hit event. And I've got my default client. It says Kaflooey, that's real production coding. You just get an error. Context with target. Okay, so yes, I want a context and I want to send something. So I'm going to do a yoinkity yoink. This is all, I believe, Apache licensed. Oh, really? Do I not have context installed? Yeah, that's the one I want. Okay, the local host doesn't seem right to me. It shouldn't be right. I should be using the magically hard-coded one. Now, you don't have to do this, actually. In Kubernetes land, there are various tricks for sort of looking things up automatically. And in fact, I might be able to do that. I can't be bothered working out how it works, though. This will still work, except for the HTTP. But you could do like a shorthand where it's like twitchy.default.service, I think, .kubernetes.cluster. And down in the chat, I see Scott has offered up an example. And I'm going to sort of see that out of the corner of my eye. I see. Oh, that's interesting. So the suggestion I'm getting from Scott, I think, is that instead of sort of hand coding my receiver, as it were, I can also code the other one. Yeah, okay, that's true. I did use where is my thing I'm copying and pasting? Oh, there we go. All right, so let's have a look at this thing. I've got a context, which is always good, good practice. This is no longer called event since I renamed it. Okay. If result of the send is that it's undelivered, then it also throws a wobbly there. And then I render the page. Okay, this is looking promising. In better software, I wouldn't have this here. I'd have some sort of Go routine off to the side doing this asynchronously. but for the purposes of what we're doing, it should be good enough. So what I am expecting to happen is for it to send it to itself into this manual handler that I created. And that will have the advantage that I won't have to use the terminal anymore to jig up various fake phony baloney things. So I'm going to do co-apply again. That would probably be because I moved everything. Yes, it would be. Oh, good. Everything starts with H. Bit of an own goal there. Okay. Apply service YAML. Why does that make me nervous? I don't feel like it built anything. I think I may have been too ambitious in moving all the files around. Yeah, well, you know what? Let's just... Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do homepage / yeah, thanks for that. Homepage / service. See how that goes. See, that doesn't feel like a build to me. It has a distinctly unbuild, like, kind of vibe to it. Why is it mad about these? Imports are not sorted. Okay, cool story, bro. There. Every time I feel like I understand how to compile things and go, oh, yes, I know what it is, because it's in the subdirectory, and in the service YAML, it's not in the subdirectory, so it should actually be twitchy/homepage. Okay. That is my hypothesis. That's my final answer. Ready? Lock it in. There we go. All right. This dancing is free, by the way. Okay, there we go. So it's configured. As we know from before, it takes a few seconds to update itself. At the moment it says hits 1. That was the previous version where I had sent events by hand. What I expect to see this time, what do I expect to see this time? I expect to see 0 on the first read through and then 1 on the next one. So it's actually going to be sort of trailing by 1 each time. That's my theory. So I should see 0 first of all. Let me try that again. Oh, well, or I could see 3. Oh yes, there's going to be that problem of the dibbly doubling. But I can see that that is happening, like so. Like it is sending events to itself. Okay, that's interesting, but you might be sitting at home going like, okay, he says he did that. He showed some code that looks like it does that, but is there some other way to verify that those events were created? And the answer is yes, we can create another trigger. You can create as many triggers as you like, subject to the capabilities of your cluster. All these things have overhead. So I'm actually going to do like Twitch trigger 2 or Twitch to sockeye. Right, and what I'm going to do is I'm still going to filter on type equals column.example.webHit, and I'm going to sync that to sockeye. Right, so now I have 2 triggers. Each of the triggers use the same filter of type, but they have different destinations. One is going to be going to Twitchy, and the other one's going to be going to sockeye. And my belief is that this means when I go to sockeye now, there won't be anything because it's our first, excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to hit the microphone, our first sort of glance at this, but when I reload this, I should see, I believe, 2 show up in sockeye, 1 for the page and 1 for the favicon. Alternatively, I could be entirely, utterly, and totally wrong, which is very disappointing. Typically, I like to be right about things. What did I do wrong? Or what have I misplaced? Have a quick look. Not that. Look at main. Diggity, com, example web hit, filter, sync, sockeye, twitch the sockeye. No, because I am sending it directly back to itself and not to the broker. That's what I did wrong. So this is where I was too smart for my own good. Very much too smart for my own good. Now I've got to think. I always find that uncomfortable. See, what I should have done is send this to the broker, right? Which should be something like Default, I think. Or is it broker ingress? Or let's see how we go. So it would be to HTTP default. Right. Yeah. Okay. So we'll try that. We'll see how that goes. I'm hoping that it goes to the broker. And this will break the page itself, right? It'll not update things. Just return in the body. I'm not sure I understand that, really. Let me have a look at this. Okay, yes. Sign direction with target. Context given target. So is the idea just not to bother with context? Okay. Let's see. We've resubmitted. I'm going to reload this. Hit 0. Hit 0 forever. But sockeye, hopefully. Yeah. No, still not seeing anything. So what's happening is that the URL I chose, she is wrong. Okay, let's have a look. Not invoked from the broker, though. So sending by clients required. If you want to create a new event in response to a cloud event, you can just return it in the body of the response and it enters broker. That's kind of clever. Yes. Okay. Interesting. I mean, that's kind of an own goal on my part, right? Is I've set myself up to do a direct delivery. So in fact, I'm probably kind of in a position where I really do need to break out a Go routine to do this in the background, because I can't return directly from this one if I have it right. So, where do I want to do that? It's like Go funk. We got the funk. There we go. And this is where I'm about to like blow up everything in all of the faces. No, that's not what I wanted. Ding, 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 ding. So I think what you're saying, Vile, is that I would not actually do these. I would simply return. That seems too easy to me. Let me see if I can find an example that can help me work out my ways. And if it was from a broker trigger invoke, well, that's the problem. It's not. I'm trying to create the events. Although earlier on you sent a link to an example. Yeah. I'm stumping the experts. It's good fun. Let's have a look. So we had receive your first cloud event. Hooray. Send your first cloud event. Serialize. And samples. Always a good place to have a squeeze. I want a sender. That's what I want. I want to send an event. Ooh, this one's got a few more bits. Oh, I see you sort of like amplify or multiply them. New HTTP, new client. Okay, so you do it a little more fancily than the other front page one. Set data. It's undelivered. Yeah, I gotta admit. Oh, that's a good point. That is a good point. So Scott's suggestion in chat is that I can just get Kubernetes to tell me. And I believe some past version of me may in fact have done this before. And lo, there is a URL. So let's go whack that in the spirit of hard coding. Ping. What did I do wrong? I got rid of the character. That's what I did wrong. And let's co this boy. Co apply. Yeah, the sync binding. That's true. I didn't really think about that. Scott brings up in chat that there is a concept called sync binding that you can use in Knative. And I discuss it in the book. The main thing that a sync binding does for your software is that it will actually inject an environment variable that you can inspect called casync. And so instead of me hard coding this, right, I would instead, is it env dot something? It's been a while. Like I would essentially reach into the operating system. I think it's os.getEnv. Yeah, I would use like getEnv and I would say casync, right? And then I don't want a dot on importalize, I want variables. Right, I would have this, just assuming that it works, and then I would put it here. Right, I would just have target casync, and I would rely on the machinery to do it for me, and that's great. But I'm not going to sort of add more variables to my hackery today. I'm still not at a place where I'm satisfied with what I'm doing. So let me scroll down on the chat, see I'm not missing anything. No, so far. Okie dokie. So let me get my bearings here. I'm going to do this in the interests of did I do it or not? Only takes a few seconds, and you know, computers are cheap, right? Says optimistically. So what I expect now is that it will send through the broker. That means I should see it in sockeye when I do the reload. And of course, it might take a few goes because there's a sort of a few seconds for the routes to update to the new version. Okay, so I'm seeing numbers that make more sense that it started from 0, and I am starting to see these events coming into here, which gives me a great deal of heart in terms of what's going on. Okay. One thing that's interesting to me is I'm still handling my count there. Okay. One thing I could do, you know, if I wanted to change things, is I could change the event so that instead of just sending the event and having somebody keep a local count, I could have the event itself carry its view of the count for like later consumption. That would require me then to dig it out. I got to admit, I'm starting to fade pretty hard at this juncture. So I'm going to try to wrap it up and to recap what we talked about today. So the first sort of 45 minutes, unfortunately, regretfully, was spent on yak shaving, and I'm very sorry about that. The important things to note, CloudEvents are intended to be a unifying, uniform interfacing standard. And the key to that is that they define a number of keys, essentially. The key to that, yeah. They provide a number of well-formed, well-named keys that should appear in any kind of data envelope or over any kind of protocol. So that might be JSON over HTTP. It could be Avro over Kafka. It, in some sense, doesn't matter as long as the names are consistent and that you follow the rules of what can go into each field. So the 4 that you have to have: always spec version, always ID, and it should be unique, because if it's not, you're in trouble someday, type, and source. If you have those 4 things in a data structure that has a mapping in CloudEvents, then you have a Cloud event. Then you can add a bunch of other things to it. There are a bunch of optional extras that are really useful. I didn't get to do anything about today. But as soon as I had those 4 things, I had an event. And you can see, for example, in here, this is saying hello world, but you know, I don't really need it. You know, if anything, it's overkill for what I want. We looked at Co, obviously, which was very helpful. We had a chance to talk a bit about Cap and Cube Cuddle, and this is starting to sound a bit like a Dr. Seuss book. We got to use a bunch of these tools. We got a chance to look at Sockeye, which is exceedingly helpful. We got to poke Sockeye directly from the command line. We also were able to write software of our own that could react to Cloud events coming in. We also looked at how triggers and brokers tie all these things together, which is probably the most important part of what we discussed today. You know, learning about what is a Cloud event is not that hard, and in practice, although you could construct them by hand, so to speak, in a number of situations, it's definitely much easier to use the SDKs. They're really good. They handle a lot of the grunge stuff for you. So why do the homework when someone else has done it for you? But yeah, the main sort of thing that you should be considering as your next stepping off point will be to think to yourself, okay, I've got my brokers, I've got my triggers, what are the things I can start to do with that? At the moment, I wedged everything into a single process for convenience. In a real system, that would be unlikely. So, for example, you can imagine having the homepage service spitting a webhead event into the broker, and that actually being shipped off to some service that interacts with, say, Redis, right? That would be probably faster in some respects, and also would have the advantage that Redis is better at persisting data. Because you've got to remember that any state that you keep in your process is at risk of being scaled to 0. Every time the process goes away, and also it's going to be set to 0 for every individual. If I sent 1,000 requests in a 10 millisecond window, Knative would start to autoscale things, and I would have a bunch of different things with different views of the world. So having them just emit events and not keep their own count would be a reasonable thing to do. And that's where you would start to wind up with 2 or 3 services doing different things. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, that's ridiculous. I just wanted to do a count. And remember, the point of this exercise was to show that a lot of things that used to have to be in the same linear process no longer have to be. It is possible to separate these things. And you can imagine that as time goes on, this information can be used by more and more people without having to update the creating system. So, for example, in the all-in-one monolith approach, if I want to develop a system that sums up all hit numbers across all of my pages, I would have to, from different departments, I might not be the only one running one of these monoliths. That would be hard. That would actually be difficult. Whereas if all of my services just emit a new hit event with some information about, the type they are, or the source, more to the point, then it becomes, I won't say trivial, but certainly a lot easier, because I've destructured or disconnected these concerns, which are not essential to each other. They are useful, but not essential. And so that's where, what seems like a certain amount of overhead at a smaller scale becomes more attractive as you go up. No free lunch, of course. You still have to think hard sometimes about what you're doing. But the tools that you get with Knative Eventing are flexible out of the box, easy to use out of the box too. I was able to do a great deal of stuff with a handful of tools. And if you think about how much effort it would have taken to do the code that we're looking at on our page, 3 years ago, it would be a real hassle, briefly, I can tell you from experience. So I hope that this has been a lot of fun for everybody. I agree with Scott. If you have a chance to play with Sockeye, please do. It is a useful tool. I find that Scott is very responsive to questions and suggestions and, of course, PRs. And that is true of the Knative community generally. Speaking of which, very briefly, the place to start your adventure is knative.dev. Well, what I should be saying is my book. But the knative.dev is also a tremendously useful website. The documentation is always improving. I think my book is good, and I have an idiosyncratic approach, and I'm focusing more on a tutorial style. But the documentation is good. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and I referred to it too as I was working. Sometimes to the code, sometimes I ask questions, and sometimes the documentation. There's also this concept of the community, which is truly a really big deal. We've got the users group, which is a great way to sort of keep up with things or to ask questions asynchronously. You might also find that in terms of talking to people, a lot of the time, the Slack channels. People are in Slack all the time. You can always come in and ask questions. I find people are very, very helpful and welcoming. And similarly for creating PRs and codes, you get a lot of great feedback. You got to remember a lot of the people working on this are really fantastic, but also really approachable and friendly. So that's it for today. I, modulo a certain amount of yak shaving, had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed interacting with everybody in the chat. Thank you all for coming. And make sure to come back, I think, not tomorrow or the day after, but, check the schedule. Come back for the next Manning Live coding. They're all good, the ones I've seen. And until next time, I will catch you later.